Hello everyone, it's Nintendo June 4th. In other words, the day before the Nintendo Switch 2 launches. And I'm sitting here like eagerly anticipating the release of the thing. I'll be getting it as soon as it gets delivered to my door. We're going to fire up a live stream immediately. Tune in for that. But there has been a lot of coping and seething online in regards to this platform, how well it's going to do, and how well it's going to be, especially from like the PC gaming handheld people, the people who insisted that the Steam Deck would be a viable competitor to the Switch 1 because, it's more powerful. Like the reality being, of course, that the Switch 1 demolished the Steam Deck and all of its handheld gaming PC brethren, and is getting a follow-up. So the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 decided to tag team the entire PC gaming handheld industry, and most of these people haven't noticed or cared. They've kept up the farce that gaming PCs are somehow relevant or competitive, and are still coping and seething about that today. And today, I would like to look at one of the biggest examples of this phenomenon, an individual I have had issues with for over a decade, ReviewTechUSA, or Rich Tomorrow, as he calls himself now, because he's such a clown, he has to lean into memes making fun of him to stay relevant. ReviewTechUSA is talking about the Switch 2. So let's take a moment to sit back and see what this man has to say.
Feels like just yesterday, you gorgeous piece of poultry, that the original Nintendo Switch was launched, and I did a gigantic Switch video showing off all the Switches, different models and accessories. Now here we are almost a decade later, and we are soon to get the successor to the original Switch. Even though this is an OLED, it's not an original Switch, but you get my point. You're horrible.
Just look at it as I stretch it.
So, hello, how are you doing?
Hard in your face.
You're probably wondering if I am getting a Nintendo Switch 2, so let's start with that. I am, I think. I had a pre-order at Walmart. I spoke to them today, and they canceled my pre-order.
I'd like to belch directly into your face right now.
No, I'm just kidding you. I'm just kidding you. They didn't. Actually, I spoke to a dude. He was very nice.
A nice man.
And he said, look, you saw the charge on your card, right? Yes. We're seeing the charge here, meaning Walmart, the guy from customer service. You're good. It's cleared. We got the money. We have the unit for you. It just may not be there on the 5th. It may actually be there like 48 hours afterwards. I'm like, you know what? Whatever. That's fine. I was going to go out anyway and film me trying to get a Switch at a brick and mortar store. We're probably going to go to, never mind. I'm not going to tell you. And there.
First of all, Rich, DSP is more popular with the birds than you'll ever be. Second of all, and I do think this is like a reoccurring problem with ReviewTechUSA in general, notice how he always says things like, oh, we're going to look at the tech, we're going to look at the accessories, we're going to look at the hardware, and yet he never seems to talk about the actual games. And this will be a reoccurring problem throughout this slot fest of a video. ReviewTechUSA doesn't talk about or play video games, which inherently makes his criticisms of Nintendo hardware completely and utterly irrelevant. As I said, no discussion over the actual hardware at all. Nothing about the games, nothing about like what he's looking forward to playing, what he's going to do with it when he actually gets a hold of the console. The entire first minute or so of this video is just this land whale sitting there talking about like, I'm glad I'm getting a Switch 2 right away because I want to go to brick and mortar stores and stream my attempts at getting one. I'm just like, aren't you interested in actually getting a hold of the hardware? Like, who cares about like, oh man, these things are hard to get. Like, who cares about that at all? Like, he doesn't give he doesn't care at all about like the actual hardware and getting a hold of the console and the games. Like his mindset is all about like cheap, easy, disposable content that has nothing to do with video games. You know, this is a reoccurring thing with him, but this is a near constant thing with Review Tech, is that he never talks about video games.
There's no way in hell I'm live streaming it, but we're going to film it and it's going to be a good time. Not really at all. It's actually supposed to be hot tomorrow and I don't really feel like sitting out in the sun, but I'm going to do it anyway for a Switch 2 and for science. Also, too, huge shout out to everyone who checked out my ASMR channel. Random little plug in the middle of this video. I have another ASMR video coming on portable clone consoles like the Trim UI Brick and the, can I get one right now? The Miu Mini and the Miu Mini Plus. I have a lot to say on them, and yes, this time I am going to do a soft-spoken video and not whispered. I listened to the criticisms in the video. As a matter of fact, as you're watching this, I will be recording that video.
Rich. I haven't looked at your ASMR channel at all. I have no intention to. But I'm certain that the primary complaint about the ASMR that you produce is that you're the one producing it. Lo and behold, why no one watches ReviewTechUSA for his tech coverage. How exactly could you look at something like the NX, even at the earliest stages, this was pretty obvious. How could you look at something like the NX and think it was going to be a failure? You know, how exactly could you look at this, like the concept that we knew of, you know, Nintendo's like the promotion of it, you know, the unveiling, like the eventual release, right? Like, how could you go through all of that and seriously think to yourself that like, oh, Nintendo, they can't compete, they can't stay relevant. Like, how exactly could you possibly do that? Like, this to me demonstrates just how out of touch like ReviewTechUSA actually is. You know, he really underestimates like, you know, what people are looking for in video game consoles. He doesn't understand the appeal of Nintendo software or its hardware, and like he just doesn't understand the company's unique strengths in general.
You know, and I think I'm gonna have my groove there. That is the most boomer thing I've ever said. Just Tech25 ASMR, link to the channel below in the description. Let's see if we get it to 1,000 subs. So it's interesting to look back on the Switch because I was very negative with Nintendo at the time when I started hearing rumors about the Switch, and I was just like, oh God. It was called the Nintendo NX at the time. And I remember sitting there thinking, they're trying to make a portable console that you could dock to the TV. So it's going to be underpowered. It's not going to have games that are going to compete with Sony and Microsoft. I understand Nintendo goes to their own beat of their own drum. But nonetheless, it's like you just had this huge failure with the Wii U. And because you marketed it poorly, now you're going to just put out a portable that you could dock to a TV? What are you doing, Nintendo? Well, I was very wrong about that.
The default cope for ReviewTechUSA, and I would argue like the entire PC master race sphere, you know, these weird tech YouTubers who don't actually know anything about technology, like the narrative always is that like, Nintendo was underpowered, and that's why the Steam Deck, the ROG Ally, like standard gaming PCs are far going to outstrip them. You know, even phones are more powerful than Nintendo hardware now. You know, they spell out this narrative that like power is everything, and they conveniently leave out the fact that like phones that powerful cost over $1,000. You know, they conveniently leave out the fact that like PC is expensive. You know, they conveniently leave out the fact that like, you know, these platforms cannot legally play Nintendo games. So like they conveniently leave out like everything that makes Nintendo more desirable than the competition to hyper focus on this singular thing that people don't actually care about. Like horsepower though. Like, you know, they don't really stop to consider that like the games that Nintendo produces are higher quality than the slop you see on gaming PCs. You know, like the Witcher 4 tech demo is a really good example. You know, this fake trailer that of just a guy walking around an open world looks less impressive than The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you know, a 2017 Wii U game. You know, that's the level of that's the gap in quality when it comes to standard AAA like slop versus like Nintendo releases at this point in time. Like the difference is astounding.
Nintendo knew what they were doing, and the Switch has been a wild success with over 150 million units sold. And looking back on the Switch, it's interesting to see the market that Nintendo opened beyond the Switch. The big reason we're seeing consoles from Valve with the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally and the various different GPD models and Aya Neo and a bunch of other companies making portable computers is because Nintendo with the Switch made companies realize, hey, people just want to play the same AAA games they're playing at home on the go. And it's not that this was the first piece of tech to do where, you know, you could play it portably and dock it to a TV. As a matter of fact, NVIDIA, before they joined forces with Nintendo and they made the chip in here for the original Switch, the Tegra X1, and they're making the chip for the Switch 2, there was other forays into the hybrid portable console scene. Like there was the tablet from NVIDIA, which you could use with the controller and hook it up to a TV, and you could play games like Half-Life 2. They said with the power of Tegra, you could play games like that. And it was cool. It was like, oh, wow. You know, especially at the time, this is going back pre the Switch. So that was really bleeding edge tech to be able to play a game like Half-Life 2 on the go and then hook it up to your TV. But it wasn't seamless. No one got the seamless part like the Switch got down, where you just plop this in the dock and then you get the picture right up on your TV, and you could either use your Joy-Cons or a Pro Controller. It wasn't done as well as Nintendo did it. And what was amazing about that, too, is the games that you saw due to the success of the Switch that developers really, they got is it a square peg in a round hole? Yeah, I think so. Witcher 3, Doom, and Doom Eternal are the first ones that come to mind. Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus, was a pretty sloppy port, but there was also Zombie Army 4, I'm thinking of off the top of my head, and many other games that you would have never thought that you would see running, like Dying Light. I understand it's an 8th gen game, and actually it was supposed to come out in some way, shape, or form for the 360 and PS3, but it's a great port. You know, it's a solid 30 FPS. It looks great. If you're looking for a way and you just have a Switch and don't have a Steam Deck or a device like it, it looks great on the OLED, especially Dying Light, and it's a really well done port. Techland put a lot of their heart and soul into that port, and it shows. So that was one thing that was cool about the Switch, is it was the first time they made a hybrid console that was tolerable, Nintendo, where you could just dock it, pull it out of the dock, and it was instant. And it was a hybrid device where you were getting a decent amount of the AAA third-party experiences, the same ones you have on home consoles, on the go. And we haven't seen it like that before. If you think before the Nintendo Switch, you know, there was the 3DS, the 2DS, the DS, Game Boy, blah, 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 blah. Most of the time, the games were a different experience than you would get on your home console or PC counterparts because the hardware was so limited. Whereas with the original Switch, yes, the Tegra X1, even when they launched the Switch, was pretty outdated. But nonetheless, it was powerful enough that you were seeing current gen games come to the Nintendo Switch console. Now, as time went on and the Switch got older, and we started going from the late 8th generation to now the 9th generation of consoles, which in my opinion barely feels like it should have existed. you saw less and less ports to the Nintendo Switch.
Oh man, the Switch was great because it had ports of third-party games that are also available on console and PC. What a joke! You know, what an absolute pleb. Like, oh man, Dying Light. Oh, that ran at a stunning 30 FPS on Nintendo Switch. Like, nobody cares about Dying Light. Okay, so. Again, ReviewTechUSA is a complete pleb, doesn't actually know what people are playing on the console, doesn't actually know what's coming out. Like, all he cares about is that, like, the console can run, like, real console games, like, real games for real gamers. It's just so cringe and, like, embarrassing, you know. A very good textbook example of what I'm talking about when it comes to these fake gamers, because, like, none of the games he mentioned were pivotal, huge successes on Nintendo Switch, right? These were minor releases that weren't well received among Nintendo fans because we were playing better games. That's simply the long and short of it, you know? The Switch is defined, I think, more by titles like things like Fantasy Life too, right? Games that kind of come out of nowhere and like get this huge following of people who like really love them and really appreciate like what they do and stuff like that. You know, generic Mars shooter where you fight demons, like that doesn't really do it for us. You know, we were never really impressed with any of that. You know, it was just complete and total slop. You know, that's kind of my mindset on this. But like, you know, the second half of this, you know, the thing I take more issue with actually is this idea that like, ooh, the Switch port stopped eventually. Like, what are you talking about, bro? Like, we've gotten like a lot of ports of like the biggest games of like the past couple of years. You know, Guilty Gear Strive came out this year. We got like Hogwarts Legacy. You know, like everything that actually was relevant. You know. Got a Switch release, you know, like there's a handful of titles that like refuse to come over, like Elden Ring and things of that nature, but like a lot of that is getting ported over to Switch too. So like again, this idea that like, ooh, there's no third-party games on Switch. It's just a complete and total cope, you know, which you even acknowledge. You know, Doom Eternal is available on Switch 1. Okay, like the fact of the matter is, this idea that like third-party games like were not coming out on Switch 1 is a complete and total farce because third-party games haven't been coming out on any platform. You know, there is nothing on PlayStation, Xbox, or PC that is relevant in this day and age. Name a single game that's come out in the past 5 years that's relevant that is not going to be available on a Nintendo console very soon. Like, you just can't do it, you know? Everything is just going to get ported onto Switch 2. Like, everything Rich has said here is a complete and total farce.
But, you know, it was the first time I remember I could not compute that Doom 2016, that just a little over a year before came to the PS4, the same game was coming to the Switch. You know, it was the first time I experienced something like that. And I'm sure it was many other people too. Then we got the Steam Deck, and that was a big deal. Obviously, it hasn't sold as many units as a Switch, but
the Steam Deck hasn't even sold as much as the Wii U. You know, like, it's not even really a relevant thing. I hate to keep bringing this up because this really is like an irrelevant piece of hardware, but this is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to ReviewTechUSA. He is going to sit there and call the highly successful, influential, iconic Wii U a failure, and then turn around and hype up the Steam Deck, a product that has like no audience, you can't even get in retail, and is just like completely and utterly irrelevant outside of like a couple of fat fucks making like YouTube videos complaining about Nintendo. You know, like that's the Steam Deck's demographic. You know, that's its primary appeal. Is like, well, I can talk about Steam Deck on my YouTube channel, and we can make fun of Nintendo fans and call them dorks. It's like, what? This is how you spend your time with your console? Like, really? Complaining about Nintendo?
Companies realize that people want these AAA experiences on the go. The Switch made the companies realize that, and you started seeing offerings from like GPD and Aya Neo trying to make a PC version of the Nintendo Switch, essentially. And then you had Valve, which really made it happen with the Steam Deck, where with SteamOS, you have a consoleized experience of PC games on the go, or you could actually dock the Steam Deck as well. Now, what's interesting is as much as I was in love with the Switch, especially when it first came out, it was those consoles, like the PC Switch-looking like consoles, that I ended up leaning towards, because most of the games I play, I know Nintendo's IPs are fantastic. I don't care if I'm 50, I'll still be playing platformers from Nintendo. But mostly I like the AAA third-party experiences, games like Elden Ring, Doom, Fear, the list goes on and on.
Doom? The same Doom that was available on Switch? That Doom? The one that you just started talking about? You were just talking about how good that was? That Doom? Elden Ring? The same game that's getting ported to Switch 2 and is getting an exclusive new title from the same developer. Where's the hype and enthusiasm for that, Rich? Why aren't you talking about that? Why are you sitting there trying to tell us that, I play AAA games? You don't play anything. You know what I mean? You don't play anything. If you did, you would find endless original titles on Nintendo Switch. You would understand just how much better the Nintendo console is than all of its competitors. You wouldn't be sitting there trying to gaslight people into thinking that, actually, I primarily play on ROG Ally and Steam Deck. You're not playing on anything. That's the long and short of it. The real reason why you don't play on Nintendo Switch is because you don't play anything.
And those games I could play on the Steam Deck, and I don't have to do port begging. Whereas if you just stick to consoles like the Switch, you got to do that. And later on in the generation, I stopped playing the Switch, and the experiences I want, I could get on PC-based hardware. But we have to remember is that even though I lost interest in the Switch because I could get my experiences I wanted on other hardware, it was because of the Switch. I feel strongly that we got those other pieces of hardware from Valve, from Asus, from GPD, from Aya Neo. If it was not for the Switch, I don't think any of those consoles would exist. Hey everybody, your favorite fat regard from the future, realizing that I didn't talk about my Switch 2 predictions, which would have essentially made this video useless. I never said I wasn't an idiot, but here are my predictions. So do I think the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be a successful piece of hardware for Nintendo? Yes, I think it is going to sell well. However, with that being said, I don't think it is going to do original Switch numbers. It's essentially going to be Nintendo's 3DS to Nintendo's DS. The Switch 2 is going to be the...
Oh no! Nintendo might not sell more than the best-selling console ever produced. Oh no, however are they gonna cope? This is such damage control, really. You're really gonna look at the Switch, and you're really gonna look at the Switch 2. You're really gonna ignore the fact that the Switch is still getting new releases in the next couple of years. You're gonna ignore the Switch 2's immediate success. You're going to ignore everything, and you're just going to sit there and be like, well, it's going to sell less than the Switch 1. That's just a cope, that has no bearing on the actual success of the hardware at all. This idea that the Switch 2 is doomed to languish in the shadow of the original Switch is just insane, especially coming from these people who have spent the past 7 years hyping up the Switch Pro and then the Switch 2 for the past several years. They weren't playing the Switch. They don't know anything about the Switch and about the audience, and don't really understand why so many people are so enthusiastic about new Nintendo hardware, because these people simply aren't gamers and don't know anything about them.
3DS and the original Switch in terms of sales numbers and relevancy is going to be the DS. And I could be wrong about that, and maybe the Switch 2 will outsell the original Nintendo Switch, but I just don't think so for several factors. And the first one being is the price of the Nintendo Switch 2. The bare bones kit or setup or whatever the hell you want to call it is $450. And if you want to get it with Mario Kart World, which is the better value, if you could find that whole pack or whatever the hell it is $499. The original Switch was $299. You are almost asking double the price. Okay, 2/3.
What a retard. This guy can't even perform basic math, and we're supposed to listen to him talk about tech. But notice how he's angling this. Notice what he's talking about, compared to the original Switch, this is way more expensive. Talking about the original Switch as opposed to the Switch 2's actual competition. It's cheaper than the PS5. It's cheaper than the Series X. Actually, the prices for those consoles have gone up, actually. It's cheaper than a Steam Deck. It's cheaper than, all the other alternatives. This is the grim reality for all of you, complaining about the price, is that, even with the price increase, the console is significantly less than the competition. And this is something that people really need to wrap their heads around, because this is the reality of the situation, is that the Switch 2 isn't really competing with the Switch 1. Okay, this idea that people are going to look at the Switch 1 and then the Switch 2 and then start comparing the price is just ridiculous. People will gladly pay more for Switch 2 for the improved technology and the new features and stuff like that. The Switch 1 will continue to exist and be supported, but the Switch 2 is the big product going forward. So people will pay more for a Switch 2. Okay, this isn't complicated. This really shouldn't be so hard to wrap your little mind around, but as we've established, ReviewTechUSA cannot perform basic mathematical equations. He is a dipshit.
I don't know, whatever. It's $200 more than the original Switch. It's $499 or $150 more. Oh my God, I can't math. Shut up. So you have that going against it. It's going to cost more. Games are going to cost more. People aren't happy with the key cartridges, which essentially is a way to have a physical access code to your game, but it doesn't actually have the game on the Switch 2 key cart. It's just like having a USB drive. It has the license for the game on there, and if you don't have the card, you can't play the game even if you have it downloaded. I mean, it's better than having just a piece of paper and a code inside of a Switch box. A lot of companies did that, but I understand it's a sign that we're essentially seeing it's all but dead physical media. And if for the collectors out there, I totally understand why you hate that and you think it sucks. But with that being said, it is the Switch 2. They did do substantial updates to the hardware, which had a little bit more GPU grunt, but nonetheless, here we are. They have things like 120 hertz screen, HDR10, and they have Dusk Bloods coming from Software, and you're going to have Elden Ring on there, even though you could play that 1,000 different ways. Speaking of which, I almost forgot to bring up this point. Here's another reason why the Switch 2 may not sell as well. Now, I'm looking right here on the screen. I understand the Steam Deck did not do Switch numbers. It's sitting at around 4 million units sold, but that did open up doorways for consumers who, before handhelds like the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, GPD Win, the whole list I've named before, the Switch was the only place that was a go-to place for AAA games that gave you the full experience, just with pared down graphics on the go. I remember Doom 2016 was announced for the Switch, and I almost crapped my pants. Turds just started flying everywhere, and it was tragic. Turds. But that was a mind-blowing thing at the time. It wasn't normal to get the same full-fat AAA experience on the go. Now in 2025, people don't think anything of it. And with the Steam Deck especially, you have a consoleized gaming, PC gaming experience on SteamOS. And SteamOS is coming to other hardware from Lenovo, like the Legion Go, another console Switch-like PC handheld. And it's also on the ROG Ally X, which I have one of those. I probably should put SteamOS on there. So you get my point. So people who may have just been into like getting The Witcher 3 and playing it on the Switch and other games like that, due to the other hardware choices, which were, let's keep it real, inspired by the Nintendo Switch, there's more choices, there's more options than just Nintendo's hardware. And people are like, hey, I don't have to port bag. I have a Steam Deck and I have an ROG Ally or a Lenovo Legion Go S, and I can play whatever PC games come out so long as these Lenovo Legion Go can handle it on Steam anywhere I go. And I don't have to be in Nintendo's walled garden. So those were things that weren't even a thought when the original Switch came out. You have the more expensive price. You have other options out there. Again, even though they don't sell as nearly as much as the Nintendo Switch did. So that may break up the pie for Nintendo, whereas many other people in 2017, this was their go-to AAA handheld gaming device. However, I do think the Switch 2 will do big numbers. It has the third-party support, like I said, and the price for what you're getting isn't completely out of control. It's still a lot more expensive than the original Switch, but it's fair. 2025, everything's expensive and everything sucks. So there's that too. One thing I wanted to mention too, and it makes you realize how time flies and how something like a console could send you, when there is a successor and you think of the previous console, could kind of send you back in a time warp. In a weird way, it feels like just yesterday when the Switch came out. But when you really think about it, it wasn't just yesterday. I think back to 2017, and yeah, that was 2 homes ago I was in. My first son was not even a year old. There were people that were here that are no longer here, and so many aspects of my life have changed. And you don't think about that when you're holding what's a current gen piece of hardware. It's just something that you play games on, and it's a means to an end. And it's not that I'm getting sentimental over the Switch. I'm not in the slightest. But when a new piece of hardware comes out, you close your eyes and you think back to that, and it kind of puts you back in that place where you were when the console originally launched, and you're like, oh my God, things have really changed. So it's not necessarily the hardware that you're getting sentimental about. It's not with me anyway. This launch, I'm in a much different place in my life than I was when the Switch 2 launched. And it makes you realize how fast time flies. So this is Rich Tomorrow, signing out. Hopefully you get a Switch 2. One way or the other, like I said, I'm getting one. Just hopefully Walmart doesn't cancel my order completely. Because even though they said they're not going to, and the guy was very nice on the phone, I don't trust Walmart. Anyway, make sure you sub to the channel. Make sure you sub to Tech25 ASMR, and I'll be streaming again real soon. And one way or the other, when I get the Switch 2, I'll stream some Mario Kart World. Have a good one, everybody.
What a cope and a seethe. Like, what was that video? What did we just watch? We just watched this guy just sit there, like, ostensibly talking about the Switch 2, but, like, not really. He's like, well, it's probably not going to do as well as Switch 1, and the Steam Deck exists now, and, like, ooh, things change. Like that was, like, his big ending, like, speech, is this idea, like, oh, I can't believe 2017 was almost a decade ago. 8 years. Things have changed so much since then. And, like, he doesn't seem to, like, want to address the elephant in the room, is that, like, the way things have changed is that the culture is like way more supportive of Nintendo and their products. Like how people like you are getting rejected by the community and how you're getting laughed at and how nobody takes you seriously when you sit there and try to like fabricate some kind of narrative against the Switch 2. Like, oh, I don't know if this is going to do as well. Like nobody cares what you think. Okay. Like, your channel was a joke before the original Switch even came out, you know? And this is a really good example as to why. You know, he didn't share any, like, of his personal stories with the Switch 1. He didn't really talk about, like, anything he was looking forward to on the Switch 2. He didn't talk about even playing it on day one, you know? That's when you know it's bad. When you spend, like, 20 minutes talking about, like, the console that's coming out tomorrow, and you just sit there and not talk about the games you're going to play on at day one. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, it was just so cringy. I don't understand, like, why he thought that this would be a good video to produce. Or, like, it's just awful, you know, just unbelievably just awful. This is Harmon Smith, and I am signing out.